2 of React Casts.
On episode 1, we started to investigate patterns for advanced component composition. In this episode, I'll talk about function as child components. Function as child component is a pattern where the parent component accepts a function as child instead of a nested React node. What usually happens is that the parent component has some internal state or does some processing or calculation. By accepting a function as child, it can expose these data by calling the function and passing them as parameters. You can then use and render these parameters any way you want. So let's start with an example. I have a component here called loggedUser. It accepts a function as child, and we'll call this function with the name of the logged user if there is one. The interesting thing here is that you can use the same loggedUser component in different scenarios, applying the username parameter in different ways. In this other example, we'll have login and logout buttons for when the username is available or not. This is obviously a very simplistic example, but as you can see, function as child components is another way to reuse common functionalities. That's the same with higher order components. So if that's the same, what's the difference between higher order components and function as child components? Well, by using a function as a child component, we decouple the parent and child components, giving you more flexibility to decide where and how to apply the parameters to the child component. Let's now implement a component that in fact accepts a function as a child. I just created an empty React application here using create React app. I'll create a folder, function as child component, and create a new React component. By using prop types, we can make sure that consumers know we are expecting a function as our child, not React nodes. Then, on the render method, we simply invoke the function. That's the basic structure of a function as child component, but obviously for it to be useful, we need to provide some information through parameters. Let's begin with an example that listens to page scroll and calls the child function with the current scroll position. So I'll add a component didMount lifecycle method to start listening for scroll events. I'll also add a component willAmount to remove the event listener. Now, I'll add a local state to keep the current scroll position and create a handleScroll method to get the actual scroll top property and set it as a new state. On my render method, I'll call the function passing this.state.position.
I will export it and our component is done. I will go back to the app component and import it to use.
But since I'm dealing with scroll, I'll create these spacer divs to force some scroll in the document. The CSS is just a big height. Here I'll add a scroll pause component and create a function as child, and I'll just show the position back on screen. Let me open the browser here, and it works. Not very inspiring though. I could try to use this value to create an effect, for example. I can throw it as a CSS rotation. First, let me get rid of this and add a simple text. Next, I'll add a style prop here, insert an object, and apply the transformation as a transform rotate Y. Let's test again. Yeah, to be honest, the effect is kind of lame, but you get the idea. Of course, we can make this more reusable. Back on the scroll pause, I can make sure the position always varies between 0 and 1, so it's easier to apply different effects. I'm fast forwarding the code changes here because they don't add much to the topic, but you can get the complete source on the video description. Back to the app component, I have more control here. I could use the position directly on an opacity effect like this. Or if I want to make the text appear as the user scrolls, I could multiply the position by the number of characters and use string.substring like this. See, you just learned how to create a function as child components. I should mention, though, that there is one downside of using function as child components. You do lose the ability to optimize the rendered children component with should component update. It's important to keep this in mind, but don't feel discouraged to try. In the vast majority of the cases, this isn't a big deal, and there are lots of great developers and libraries in production that use function as child components. One of them is React Motion. How do you like it? You just watched an episode of React Casts. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to add to the discussion and have any corrections, maybe suggestions, please comment below. Thanks for watching!